After being rejected, she walked out of the clan hall alone, and a few minutes later, everyone's eyes turned toward her at once. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fir wood, a mixture of the scent of the torches burning inside the temple and the overwhelmingly oppressive aroma of cedar emanating from King Keth's on the dais. In the center of the hall, the deep blue crystal known as the Stone of Truth glowed with a faint, eerie light. It not only symbolized the ancient bloodline covenant but also served as the guillotine now hanging over my head. As the orphan daughter of a fallen noble family, the fact that I am standing here is entirely due to that contract I was forced to sign. And this body of mine, one that appears far too frail from hunger and poverty. Touch it, Elena. The queen sat high above, her fingers painted with deep red nail polish tapping lightly on the armrest. Her tone as sharp as ice. Prove whether your so-called declining noble lineage is worthy of setting foot in the King of Alfred's bedchamber. Her gaze swept across the room, a look that blended contempt and cruelty, as if she were scrutinizing a prey about to be skinned. The nobles around her let out a murmur of low whispers. The air was thick with malice and scrutiny directed at me. They greedily awaited my humiliation, waiting for this marriage hastily arranged for political renaissance to become a complete laughingstock. I looked up at Catharus. He sat upon his throne, his eyes like bottomless, icy pools devoid of any warmth, with only a cold, beast-like scrutiny that made every inch of my skin shiver. He was King Al of France, the absolute ruler of this land of werewolves. Every breath he took seemed to send tremors through the surrounding air. I could feel the oppressive presence of a top predator. He didn't care who I was or whether I lived or died. He simply watched this farce with indifference, as if I were nothing more than an insignificant diversion in his long reign. My fingertips were getting closer and closer to the Stone of Truth. In that instant, the hall seemed to freeze. Even the flickering of the candlelight appeared to come to a halt. I closed my eyes, and the moment my fingertips touched the cold, crystalline stone, a searing, lava-like pain shot through my entire body from my fingertips. It wasn't just a simple burning sensation, it was a primal roar, as if some massive, long-dormant beast had suddenly awakened with a thunderous roar inside my veins. Click! A crisp cracking sound echoed through the hall. The Stone of Truth, a symbol of royal authority said to be indestructible, suddenly crumbled to dust in the palm of my hand. Pale purple powder drifted through the air, followed by an aura that was both ancient and powerful, carrying the scent of rotting soil from the depths of the forest and the chill of a primordial winter. Dead silence. Not even the faintest rustle of wind could be heard in the entire hall. Everyone held their breath, staring in horror at the shards on the floor. The air was no longer filled with the mundane aura of a fallen noble like me, but with a primal force that instinctively made every werewolf present feel subdued and terrified. My heart pounded violently against my chest, and that pain was transforming into a frenzied power that forced my senses to sharpen. I could hear the chaotic heartbeat of the attendant in the corner of the hall, and I could smell the faint scent of fear on the queen, hidden beneath the overpowering fragrance of her perfume. She's a witch, or a thief who has stolen forbidden powers. The queen's scream pierced the silence as she sprang to her feet, her eyes filled with disbelief, murderous intent, and madness. Ceases. Kill her. This woman has cursed blood running through her veins. She will bring down your kingdom. The Stone of Truth has never been wrong unless she's using some evil disguise. I looked at Seth, who was slowly rising to his feet. His tall, muscular frame, shrouded in a black cloak, resembled a god of war walking among mortals. He walked down the steps one by one, each step seeming to echo with my heartbeat. A faint crack seemed to appear in the coldness in his eyes. It wasn't anger, but an extremely dangerous excitement stirred by primal instinct. That was the look a hunter has when he spots prey he's never seen before. He stepped in front of me, and a sense of oppression washed over me like a tidal wave. His cold fingers suddenly clamped down on my jaw, forcing me to look up at him. The pads of his fingers were rough, marked by calluses from years of gripping a sword. The look in his eyes seemed as if he were about to devour me whole, yet at the same time, he appeared to be struggling to suppress some overwhelming impulse. "What on earth are you?" His voice was low and hoarse, carrying a vibration unique to beasts. "In this kingdom, No power has ever been able to shatter the stone of truth like this. Tell me. What kind of toxins are flowing through your veins? I clenched my teeth, met his gaze which was cold enough to freeze a person's soul, and struggled to keep my legs from trembling. Inside, I was screaming and trying to escape. But on the outside, I had to hold on to that last shred of defiance. I am merely a bride you were forced to choose. Your Majesty, now that the truth you speak of has been shattered, this meaningless humiliation should come to an end. I struggled violently to break free from his grip, and amid everyone's horrified stares, I turned resolutely and strode toward the heavy oak door. Behind me, whispers swirled like boiling water, and every gaze felt like a poison-tipped arrow, but I felt no pain. At that moment, the guards in the hall were gripped by a strange, paralyzing stillness. A fear rooted deep in their very blood prevented them from making a single move. Leaving them to watch helplessly as I crossed the threshold of protocol and walked out through that massive door that symbolized power, I pushed open the heavy royal gates. The cold night wind swept up my collar, and I walked alone into the mist-shrouded forest. The shadows of the trees twisted like ghosts in the moonlight. But I had no time to think about that. All I wanted was to escape that hall filled with lies and murderous intent. However, a few minutes later, I heard a piercing, low growl coming from the hall. It wasn't Cassius's voice, but rather the sound of some kind of extremely painful, suppressed, animalistic struggle. I instinctively turned around. At the edge of the forest, I found myself gazing across at that gate from a distance. At that very moment, every pair of eyes in the crowd turned in unison, fixing their gaze directly on where I was standing. I could feel an extremely violent, searing bond of souls like a vast net spanning space and wrapping itself tightly around my soul. Kaiser stood in the center of the hall, staring intently at my back. His eyes, usually calm and deep, were suddenly filled with an eerie golden light, the sign of a soulmate's awakening. The air in the forest was so cold it felt like it was gnawing at my bones. That pull from Cassius's soul, coming from deep within the hall, felt like a red-hot iron chain, tightly bound to my heart. I stumbled through the thorns, my fingertips cut open. The blood that oozed out fell onto the damp, decaying leaves and, to my surprise, gave off a faint, bitter, yet refreshing scent reminiscent of ancient, weathered wood. 3 days ago, when my father dragged me out of that cramped attic and tossed the contract bearing the royal seal onto the table, that fear still flows through my veins like ice-cold water. He knelt on the ground, humbly begging the royal representative to forgive his family's debt. And I became the cheapest bargaining chip in that debt settlement agreement. At the time, I had no idea that this so-called alpha marriage was actually a move by Kaisers to quell the influence of reactionary dukes within the kingdom. Had randomly selected a down-and-out noble with no connections and whose lineage was not even clearly documented to serve as a political pawn under his through. He needed a docile puppet, or rather, a sacrificial offering he could use at any time. He didn't care at all who this bride was. He just needed a pretext to shut those ambitious dukes up. Because in this kingdom rife with strife, a noble bride of commoner birth was always the easiest target to manipulate. Damn it. Why do I feel this way again? I clutched my chest as the tremor as if my soul were being torn apart grew increasingly intense. That was the sensation of a mate's awakening, the supreme bond in werewolf lore, but all I felt was rejection and despair. I lifted the collar of my old garment on my left shoulder. The dark purple mark which had been imprinted there long ago and which I had concealed with herbs for 17 years was now emitting a faint, burning glow. This was no ordinary noble family crest, but a mark signifying the bloodline of an ancient royal house long since extinct. Should this be exposed, forget about becoming queen. The only fate awaiting me would be to be torn to pieces by all the competing factions. She's over there. A rough voice cut through the silence, and 2 shadowy figures clad in iron armor leaped down from the treetops. They were the suicide squad sent by the Duke. They reeked of rotting flesh, a side effect of the low-level werewolves taking banned drugs. I couldn't help but step back. The frenzied power unleashed by my awakening not only failed to protect me at that moment, but because I couldn't control it actually left my body weakened. Don't even think about resisting, you filthy little slut. One of them raised a long sword, its blade glinting with silver powder designed to target werewolf bloodlines. Once you're dead, His Grace the Duke can place the true queen on the throne, while you're nothing but a failed experiment, cast out for having angered the stone of truth. Just as the blade came down, a whirlwind swept through the entire grove. I instinctively closed my eyes. But the excruciating pain I had anticipated did not come. Instead, I felt a bone-chilling cold, followed immediately by the dull crack of shattering bones and the death squad's piercing screams. When I opened my eyes, the two assassins had already been hurled 10 meters away into an ancient tree, their bodies twisted into grotesque shapes. Cassius stood before me, his back turned to me, his broad silhouette blocked out all the moonlight. The rich scent of cedar emanating from him completely overwhelmed might was so overpowering that there was no doubt about it. Who gave you the nerve to lay a hand on my bride in my hunting grounds? His voice was as cold as ice on a knife's edge. He turned around, his golden eyes glinting with a chilling light in the darkness. He grabbed my wrist with such force that overwhelming, alpha-like dominance that I could barely breathe. Elena, do you think you can get away? Or do you think those vile secrets you've been hiding will stay hidden from me for much longer? He dragged me forcefully toward the palace. I staggered, trying to break free. But he shoved me hard against the stone wall of the ancient castle. He pressed one hand against the wall next to my ear, his breath tickling my neck. That powerful masculine scent made my heart race uncontrollably. You chose me, Cassius, because of my family's debts. Because I have no connections, I said, looking straight into his eyes which seemed to see right through me as I fought back the lump in my throat, my voice trembling with anger. Don't treat me like a pawn in your political struggles. You don't care who I am at Al-Yuri, just using me. He fell silent for a moment, then ran his fingertip across my cheek. That aggressive touch made my whole body go rigid. Take advantage of you, my bride. It seems you haven't realized yet that from the moment the stone of truth shattered just now, you are no longer that destitute, orphan noblewoman. He leaned down, his teeth barely grazing my earlobe, his voice surprisingly hoarse. Now that our souls are bound together, whether you like it or not, your body, your will, and even your filthy secrets, they all belong to me now. I could feel the heart pounding violently inside his chest. It was a beastly longing, and a sense of danger I had never imagined. Just then, the door to the confinement chamber burst open, and the queen appeared in the doorway, accompanied by a group of dukes who were glaring menacingly. Caesar, let her go at once, the queen said, her sharp voice betraying her barely concealed impatience. She is an awakened source of the curse. She will destroy your reign. If the king remains obstinate, according to the laws of the Council of Elders, we will have no choice but to take drastic measures to protect the kingdom. Cathy's arms tightened suddenly, pulling me tightly into his embrace. In that instant, I realized I was standing in the eye of the storm, and that this man who had dragged me back from hell might just be the most dangerous prison of all in this dark forest. The air in the confinement chamber froze instantly, and the hem of the queen's robe scraped against the floor with a sound sharp enough to make one's teeth ache. The dukes behind her all wore menacing expressions, and the metallic clang of their drawn swords echoed through the cramped space, a provocation they had long planned. Cathy's did not retreat a single step. He enveloped me completely in his shadow. That resolute, protective stance was less a sign of personal concern for me than a solemn declaration that the royal domain was inviolable. Extreme measures. Kethers slowly turned around, a cruel smile curving his lips. His hand was still clamped around my waist, his grip so tight I could almost feel my bones groaning. Here, no law can override the Alpha King's judgment. If by protection you mean openly resorting to violence in my bedchamber, then I suggest you first consider whether your necks are thick enough. The queen was not intimidated by his presence. Her eyes, rimmed with deep red coal, pierced through the crowd and fixed intently on my shoulder, as if she could see right through the ancient mark hidden beneath my herbal ointment. The scent she gives off has changed. Chaos. That is not the aura of a fallen noble. It is the remnant of the blood moon catastrophe. If you insist on sheltering a cursed woman, you are not only defying the Council of Elders, but also pushing the entire kingdom toward the abyss of destruction. My heart was pounding like a drum, and the burning sensation brought on by that soul bond nearly made me faint. I could feel Cassius's fingers tightening around my waist. The bulge of his muscles conveyed a sense of extreme danger, was intent on killing me. But what I fear even more is that, in order to uphold the so-called order of rule, he might decide to offer me up as a sacrifice to the Council of Elders to quell the conflict. A curse. Cassius let out a low chuckle, his voice brimming with icy derision. If she is a curse, then I am the vessel of that curse. In this kingdom, I am the only rule. With a sudden wave of his hand, a violent, pure werewolf aura exploded throughout the hall. The group of dukes clearly hadn't expected him to strike so directly. Caught off guard, several of the older werewolves were knocked to the ground by the invisible shockwave, blood spilling from their mouths. I hid in Keth's embrace, sensing the savage aura emanating from his body, an aura that seemed capable of incinerating everything as an unprecedented shudder coursed deep through my spine. I know he's using this conflict to intimidate the parasites who covet his throne. And I am merely the sharpest blade in his hand, or perhaps the bait that draws the most fire. The queen's face turned deathly pale. She clenched her jaw tightly, and the fury in her eyes was almost palpable. Very well, since you insist on this, we shall seek an oracle in the name of the moon goddess. If she is innocent, we will no longer stand in the way of this wedding. But if the shattering of the stone of truth was caused by the forbidden power within her, then please hand her over to the Council of Elders to deal with. Kaisers fell silent and glanced down at me. At that moment, the golden light in his eyes was no longer the cold detachment and excitement I'd seen when we first met. Instead, it had become complex and profound, tinged with a sense of ambition and control that I couldn't decipher. His long fingers gently gripped my chin, forcing me to face the group of enemies who were staring at me like vultures. Will you prove it to them, my bride? His voice was hoarse, tinged with a hint of mockery. Prove that you're not just a forsaken girl sold into the palace to pay off a debt, but a miracle. One worth fighting the entire council for. He had clearly already guessed the secret I was hiding, but instead of exposing it right then, he chose to use it as leverage to forcibly bind my fate to his. As I looked at him, it suddenly dawned on me that this marriage had never been a political compromise, but rather a meticulously planned gamble, and I was merely a pawn in this game of life and death. One that could be discarded at any moment. I have nothing to prove, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, as a sense of resilience, the kind forced upon me by a desperate situation, swelled within me. But if you hand me over to them, Keithas, you will lose not only a bride, but the last shred of your dignity as King of Alpha. The air was thick with tension. I could even smell the sour, acrid scent of sweat on those dukes, secreted by their fear. Kether's hands suddenly clamped down on the back of my head, pressing me into the crook of his neck. Amid the stunned gazes of the crowd, he planted an intensely aggressive kiss on me, a kiss that was less a kiss and more a possessive act of conquest. Step back, he commanded coldly without turning his head. The unquestionable authority in his voice forced the queen, who had been about to retort, to swallow the curse on her tongue. Once that group had retreated like stray dogs, the door to the confinement room closed again, and that oppressive silence once more enveloped us. Keths pinned me against the wall. His breath was heavy and hot, and the frenzy born of the mate bond pulsed wildly in his eyes. What you just said showed a lot of courage, he said, lowering his head and gently biting my earlobe. The tingling sensation sent shivers down my spine. But in the palace, courage often means death. Elena, don't try to pull that blackmail trick on me, because on my territory, no one but me can decide whether you live or die. He held me captive between the wall and his broad chest. That extreme disparity in strength made me realize how insignificant I was. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw myself reflected there, and I was no longer the lonely little girl who used to tremble in my father's lap. If you want my life, you can take it right now. I looked at him, my tone surprisingly calm. That soul-deep bond had made me no longer feel complete fear toward him, but instead sparked a desire to stand up to him. But if you want to use me to get something, Keithas, you'd better make sure the price you offer is enough to quell the rage that's about to awaken within this body of mine. He looked at me, and in that instant, I saw a fleeting look of surprise in his deep eyes, as well as a primal longing he had never revealed to anyone before. He loosened his grip, and the suffocating pressure vanished instantly, replaced by an unsettling silence almost like the stillness before the hunt. Kathy's turned and walked toward the heavy, round black oak table in the center of the room, on which sat a bottle of aged spirits that had just been opened. The dark red liquid looked like congealed blood in the candlelight. He didn't look at me, but simply poured himself a glass, his movements elegant yet marked by a chilling precision. "You're quite interesting, Elena." His deep voice echoed through the empty room, carrying a texture like grit grinding against metal. Most people, when faced with the council, would either fall to their knees begging for mercy or at least be rendered speechless by fear. But you seem more concerned about whether your dignity has been compromised. I smoothed out the rumpled hem of my skirt, my fingertips instinctively brushing against the mark on my shoulder that was still burning hot. And I forced down the fluttering excitement welling up inside me. In the presence of this king of Alphonse, any pretense seemed futile, but I couldn't back down if I did. I would truly be a lamb led to the slaughter in this harem. Dignity is all I have left. Your Majesty. I walked up behind him, maintaining a safe distance, even though the mate bond made my body instinctively want to draw closer to him. As for whether I am the miracle in your eyes, that depends on whether you're willing to view that mark which could kill me's a bargaining chip to secure your throne. He set down his glass and spun around abruptly, his golden eyes flashing with a predatory gleam in the darkness. He moved with lightning speed, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. His large hand gripped my lower back and pulled me forcefully toward him. I crashed into his rock-hard embrace, and the intense scent of cedar and liquor instantly enveloped me, an aggressively dominant aroma that domineeringly filled every inch of my breathing space. A bargaining chip. He chuckled softly as his slender fingers slowly traced down my neck, finally coming to rest just above my collarbone, where they precisely brushed the edge of the mark concealed by the herbs. You're overestimating your own importance, little one. To me, neither the Duke's influence behind the Queen nor the rotten issues of the council matter as much as the truth hidden within your body. He leaned in close to my ear, and his hot breath sent a shiver down my spine. Tell me, who exactly was guiding you that day in the forest? The power that shattered the stone of truth is certainly not something a mere down-and-out noble could possess. Don't try to brush it off with lice in front of an alpha. The sound of your heartbeat is the most honest testimony. I could feel the slight pressure from his fingertips. If he pushed down just a little more, he would completely tear away that facade. At that moment, the long-suppressed fear deep within me finally collided with a certain longing, creating an eerie resonance. That anger, rooted in my very blood, was completely ignited by his provocation. I was no longer that lowly debtor, but the sole heir to this ancient lineage. I looked up and met his eyes, which seemed to see right through me. And a cold smile unexpectedly played on my lips. What if I told you that it was the moon goddess's guidance? Your Majesty, do you truly believe that this realm you rule belongs entirely to you? There are some things that even a powerful alpha may not be able to control. Kaiser's expression darkened instantly, his previously mocking look replaced by a dangerous ferocity. He shoved me away with such force that I staggered several steps across the floor. The candlelight in the hall flickered violently from the burst of power he released, and several candles even went out completely, plunging the room into even deeper darkness. Don't mention the moon god to me. His voice grew low, hoarse, and frenzied, a bestial growl rumbling in his throat. He thrust you before me, and it was certainly not to offer any guidance. Within these palace walls, my will alone is the only divine decree. Just then, a series of urgent knocks on the door broke the suffocating standoff. A servant's trembling voice came from outside. Your Majesty, an urgent report has arrived from the border. The enemy nation's Alpha has led an advance force across the misty forest's defenses and demands to engage in a challenge of the kings with you directly on this night of the full moon. Kaiser's turned around, and his face, which had been filled with fury just moments before, instantly regained that cold, calculated composure. He didn't even glance back at me. He simply strode to the door and casually draped the black cloak, a symbol of war, over his shoulders. The king's challenge. He let out a cold laugh, his voice brimming with indifference toward death. It seems those guys can't wait to offer their heads to my sword. Elena, stay here. Don't even try to walk out that door. Or you'll die at the hands of my guard before the council has a chance to execute you. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his imposing figure from view. I stood in the empty room, the stinging sensation in my fingertips growing stronger. I walked over to the window and looked up at the crescent moon, obscured by dark clouds. A sense of foreboding unlike anything I'd ever felt before welled up inside me. That so-called challenge of the king was far more than just an invasion by an enemy nation. It was a conspiracy against Khesis, and I was the key to thwarting it. If he fails the challenge, then I, his mate, whom he has forcibly marked, will become prey for all hostile forces to devour. I must leave this place not to flee, but to fully understand, on this night of impending chaos, what this power within me, a power strong enough to shatter the stone of truth, truly means. However, just as I turned to look for an escape route outside the window, a deep, eerie voice came from the shadows of the room. If you step outside right now, you'll die a horrible death. Little princess. I spun around suddenly and saw the queen's personal attendant standing in the shadows, clutching a poison-tipped silver dagger. His cloudy eyes were filled with lust and greed directed at me. I didn't scream at the sight of that poison-tipped dagger. My instinct for survival exploded in the depths of my brain, transforming that shudder of fear into a calm that chilled me to the bone. That attendant, I remembered him. His name was Barry, the queen's most vicious henchman. Responsible year after year for disposing of the nobles who had met so-called accidental deaths. He was stepping out of the shadows, his footsteps as light as a ghost's, the silver blade glowing with a faint blue hue in the dim moonlight. You look surprised, Elena. Barry lowered his voice, a sickening grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Did you really think Cathris would go up against the council just for a debt collateral? He only kept you around so he could use your blood in an ancient ritual before the challenge ends to shore up his crumbling reign. I slowly backed away, my back bumping against the cold window frame, and my fingertips quietly reached for a decorative candlestick on the edge of the windowsill, my only weapon for self-defense. A ritual. What kind of ritual could he possibly need that would make a lackey like you, who only knows how to hide in the shadows, come out into the open? He needs a sacrificia vessel of ancient lineage who hasn't fully awakened yet. Barry lunged forward with astonishing speed, thrusting the short blade straight at my heart. The queen sent me to tell you that as long as you disappear, this so-called challenge of the king will turn into a public trial against Keths, and you will be the final straw that breaks his back. In that critical moment, my body seemed to slip beyond the control of my conscious mind. Instead of swinging the candlestick, I instinctively raised my left hand, and the ancient emblem branded on my shoulder seemed to come to life in that instant. A surge of searing energy rushed from my chest to my fingertips. It wasn't magic, but a primal aura forcibly awakened from my bloodline. I let out a soft gasp, and for a split second, space seemed to warp. Barry's short blade came to an eerie halt less than an inch from my chest, as if it had sunk into a thick quagmire, and he himself unable to withstand the sudden impact collapsed to his knees in agony, emitting a bestial, choked-off retching sound from his throat. What kind of power is this? Barry looked up in terror, his pupils contracting violently, an instinctive fear that only a werewolf would feel upon encountering a top predator. You're not a fallen noble. You're from that family. He didn't get to finish his sentence. I pressed my palm against the air, and the energy erupted with full force, slamming him hard against the wall. The bricks shattered, and Barry spat out a mouthful of blood. The silver blade in his hand fell to the ground with a sharp clang. Panting heavily, I stared at my hands. That power felt both unfamiliar and yet gave me a twisted sense of pleasure. Was this what they meant by a cursed bloodline? It had actually managed to effortlessly overwhelm a high-ranking guard. Suddenly, a heavy clang of armor rang out from outside the door. Damn it! Cassius's personal guard had heard the noise. I had to leave immediately, since he intended to use me as a pawn. I would never just sit back and wait to be killed. I violently kicked open the wooden window lattice. The cold night wind instantly filled my lungs. Outside the window stood the towering cliffs of the ancient castle, and below lay a bottomless forest shrouded in mist. With no way out, I took a deep breath in. The very moment the guard kicked open the door, leaped into the darkness. The biting cold wind howled in my ears, and in that moment, I thought I saw the shadow of a huge, silvery wolf darting across the moonlit landscape. When I hit the ground, I didn't shatter into pieces as I'd expected. Instead, an unknown force steadied my body, allowing me to land lightly on the soft mud. Deep within the forest, the ancient royal capital was engulfed in the flames of war. In the distance, Cathis stood atop the city walls, his posture as straight as a sword, facing the dark, dense advance guard of the enemy army across from him. His gaze pierced through the forest for several li, seemingly locking onto my exact location. He saw me, and those golden eyes blazed like fire in the night. I felt the intense tremor of that bond. He was calling to me, a commanding call that brooked no refusal. Don't try to run away, my bride. His voice actually echoed directly in my mind, carrying that unique, icy sense of oppression. The battlefield has been laid out for you. Now is the time for you to prove your true worth. I stood in the shade of the trees, my fists clenched. The king's challenge, the enemy nation's invasion, the conspiracy behind it all. And that servant I had killed. At that moment, all the clues came together. Cathis wasn't protecting me at all. He was forcing me, in this deadly game, to unleash with my own hands the primal power of the ancient Wolf King, the power that makes every alpha tremble. Just then, a figure emerged from the mist. It was Alpha from the enemy Nation, a man with a rugged, burly face who reeked of blood. He looked at me and flashed a greedy grin. So this is the mate that Cesis secretly hid in the palace. Destroy him, and Cesis's faith will crumble. I looked up, and just as the man charged toward me, I realized I wasn't afraid. On the contrary, a kind of madness called awakening was slowly spreading in the depths of my eyes. Since you're all out to take my life, let's see who the real prey is in this wilderness. I charged straight at that massive werewolf, and the mark on my back completely transformed into a blazing inferno. Moonlight pierced through the mist, bathing the massive figure of Alpha, the enemy, in its glow. In his wolf form, he was a colossal gray wolf, with corrosive saliva dripping from his sharp fangs. As he lunged at me, the ground shook, yet I felt a strange sense of calm. The power inside me was no longer chaotic, surging lava. Instead, it gradually coalesced into a frigid torrent that raced up my spine. Just as his massive paw was about to touch my shoulder, I flicked my left hand upward, and the moisture in the air instantly condensed into a translucent barrier of solid ice. The gray wolf's powerful blow struck it, producing a thunderous clang like metal striking metal. The barrier shattered on impact, but I skillfully deflected the force. Using that momentum, I rolled backward and, as I did so, pulled a broken, dry branch from the dirt. Is that it? The gray wolf spoke in a human voice, its tone rough and grating. Cathis's woman is nothing but a bluff. He lunged again, this time using his speed. His massive body turned into a streak of gray lightning. I didn't back down. Instead, I charged straight toward him. I slipped through the gap as he landed, and the broken branch in my hand infused with true kybe came harder than steel. I thrust upward with all my might, and the sharp tip sank precisely into the joint of his forelimb. He let out a piercing howl, and his massive body, having lost its balance, crashed heavily into the dirt, kicking up a cloud of dust. I stood behind him, gasping for breath, the mark on my shoulder flickering in and out of view with my heartbeat glowing a dusky red. The thrill of controlling the battlefield and determining life and death is corroding my human sanity. What kind of bloodline is this? He struggled to get to his feet, the greed in his eyes having given way to deep-seated fear. This oppressive feeling. You're the one who was exiled. Before he could finish speaking, a pitch-black afterimage plummeted from the sky. Click. The sound of shattering bones was incredibly crisp. Seth had appeared at the edge of the battlefield at some point. He was holding the gray wolf by the back of its neck with one hand, as if it were a lamb awaiting slaughter. The black cloak draped over him was drenched in blood, and his golden pupils had now completely transformed into the vertical slits of a beast, seething with murderous intent. On my territory. You have no right to go after my prey right in front of me. Kethas's voice was as cold as if it had been forged in the depths of hell, with an unquestionable burst of strength. He snapped the neck of that enemy alpha so violently that the creature didn't even have time to beg for mercy. He casually tossed the corpse into the mud, turned around, and fixed his gaze on me like an arrow. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart pounding wildly against my chest. And that bond of the soul grew more intense than ever before. Because of his arrival, the power I had just awakened as if beholding a monarch began to surge madly into his body. What are you doing? He strode toward me, his golden eyes filled with disbelief and shock. How is it possible that the power within you is actively nourishing me? I collapsed to the ground, and the drain of that power left me feeling a wave of weakness I'd never experienced before. He pulled me into his arms, and when his cold hands touched my skin, I felt a shiver run deep into my soul. His body was burning hot, a reaction typical of an alpha after drawing energy from the battlefield, and I, of all people, had become his power source. So that's why you chose me, I said hoarsely, clutching the hem of his shirt weakly. Your so-called political marriage was really just a way to secure a mobile supply depot, so you could remain invincible in war, wasn't it? Caesar froze. He looked at me, and a deeply complex expression flashed across his cold face. He pulled me close, with such force that it almost broke my ribs. He didn't deny either, rather. At that moment, he simply had no need to pretend. I am the king. Elena. A king does not need to explain his methods to anyone. He lowered his head, his teeth gently piercing the artery on the side of my neck, a bloody mark. But if you are my mate, then this offering is your duty as the Moonlight Queen. The mist all around began to lift, and the sound of enemy retreating trumpets echoed from the distance. As I looked at Setha's face, which appeared even more handsome and sinister against the backdrop of blood, I finally realized that this challenge was by no means the end of the war. He killed an enemy, yet in doing so, he laid his ambitions bare before me, and if this woman he treated as a mere tool suddenly felt a twisted, all-consuming possessiveness at that very moment, one powerful enough to burn everything to the ground. I reached out and wrapped my arms around his neck, whispering softly in his ear. Since I'm your source of sustenance, Cesus, you'd better make sure you're never defeated by your enemies, because if you die, I'll burn out completely along with this body. He jerked his head up, his eyes flashing with a kind of frenzied fighting spirit. Standing there on the wasteland strewn with corpses, surrounded by the darkness of the approaching dawn, I knew there was no turning back for either of us. However, just then, the deep, muffled toll of the Elder's bell echoed from deep within the forest. It was a summons, the final judgment on Kethas for consorting with the forbidden bloodline. The muffled toll of the bell echoed through the forest, carrying a decaying yet solemn metallic resonance. It was the Council of Elders' funeral bell. Each strike seemed to herald the end of King Keth's reign. Amid the mist of the forest, the glow of torches grew closer as hundreds of royal guards clad in silver armor, led by the elders, surrounded the wasteland. Caesar, your tyranny ends here. The elder leading the group was a man with a deeply furrowed face, holding a staff of judgment that radiated a holy white light. You have forged a soul bond with a woman bearing the forbidden mark without authorization, thereby violating the royal bloodline code. According to ancient law, you are guilty. I leaned against Caius's chest, feeling the heart beating inside his chest gradually settle from its initial frenzy into a deathly calm. He let go of me and slowly stood up. Though he was surrounded by hostile sword blades, he moved with the composure of a monarch entering his court. His black cloak fluttered in the wind, and in the light of the torches, his golden eyes gleamed with a savagery that seemed ready to tear everything to shreds. Crime. He let out a cold, low chuckle, the echo reverberating across the vast wasteland. The blood I've spilled on this land is enough to drown all of you vermin hiding in the shadows. If you think this little show of force is enough to strip me of my throne, Then come and try. We do not seek to deprive, but to purge. The elder waved his scepter, and the royal guard advanced as one. That woman, the bloodline within her is a stain even the moon goddess would erase. Kill her. Then imprison you at the very bottom of the abyss. This is for the survival of the entire kingdom. I felt a chill run down my spine. They were going to kill me and destroy Keth's as well. I instinctively tried to step back, but Keth's grabbed my wrist. He didn't turn around. But the strength he conveyed through his grip filled me with an unprecedented sense of peace. It was his promise. A vow to protect me even at the cost of his own life. Elena, he said softly, his voice strangely tinged with a rare, prayer-like tenderness. If I told you that allowing you to fully awaken this power might cost me my throne, would you still choose to stand by my side? I looked at him, and in that moment, I finally understood the truth behind this game. Not only was he using me as a resource, but he was also gambling, betting that the ancient power sealed within me could completely subdue the Council of Elders, who were attempting to seize control of the royal family. Since we've come this far, I said, stepping up beside him and letting my fingertips brush against the long sword lying on the ground. The moment I gripped it, the blade emitted a crisp hum. Let's show these old fools just how much trouble this so-called forbidden bloodline can stir up. I swung my sword with all my might. The sword energy blazed like a rainbow, actually cleaving a bottomless chasm in the ground and bringing the Imperial Guard's charge to an abrupt halt. The sense of power brought on by that awakening surged like a tidal wave. And my eyes glowed a dark red in the darkness of the night. Kaisers looked at me. A flicker of shock crossed his eyes, followed by uncontrollable elation. He raised his head to the sky and let out a wolf howl that shook the heavens, completing his transformation in an instant. A massive black wolf, its fur as dark as obsidian, descended like a deity amid the flames. He crouched low, motioning for me to mount him. Without hesitation, I climbed onto his back and gripped his mane, which was as stiff as steel needles. In that moment, all barriers between us were completely shattered, and our souls merged completely. He was the king, the predator of this land, and I was an awakened ancient soul, his queen. Kill. He uttered just one word, his voice carrying the cruelty of a king. We transformed into a black bolt of lightning and charged straight into the encirclement of hundreds of enemies. The silver armor shattered like paper under our sharp claws, and the stench of blood filled the air in an instant. It was an asymmetrical massacre and a bloody baptism as we marched toward the capital. However, just as we were about to break through the elders' defensive line, an extremely eerie purple mist rose from the ground. It was an ancient forbidden spell, specifically designed to target werewolves like us whose souls are bound together. I felt my body go rigid in that instant, and Seth let out a pained howl as his massive wolf form teetered precariously in midair. Oh no, that's the queen's witchcraft. Keth's voice grew faint in his mind. I saw the queen standing on a distant hillside, holding a pulsating heart like crystal in her hand and glaring at us with a look of hatred. The purple mist, like a living venomous snake, seeped through my pores into my flesh, and that chill instantly froze my senses. Cathy's remained in his wolf form, but each breath was accompanied by a shudder of pain, and drops of black blood began to seep from his obsidian-like fur. Seeing this, the elders let out triumphant, maniacal laughter. They shuffled toward us with heavy steps, their staffs channeling holy light powerful enough to reduce us to ashes. It's over, Elena. The queen walked slowly toward her, her opulent velvet robe fluttering in the wind like a poisonous flower blooming on a grave. This forbidden spell will not only seal your bloodline, but it will also shatter your souls completely. Keithas, you've sacrificed your kingdom for a plaything of impure blood. I could feel Cassius's muscles spasming violently. He tried to stand up to protect me, but was pinned firmly to the ground by that eerie purple barrier. In that desperate, deathly silence, I felt the mark on my shoulder burning wildly, almost self-destructively, under the extreme pressure. That pain was, to my surprise, engaged in some kind of brutal battle against the toxicity of the forbidden spell. Queen, do you really think you're doing this for the kingdom? I slowly slid down from Keithas's back and stood barefoot on the cold earth. though my body trembled from the forbidden spell. The dark red glow in my eyes burned even more intensely. You're just afraid. You fear the reawakening of this ancient bloodline. You fear that once I am fully awakened, your filthy crown will be reduced to dust in an instant. I didn't look at the Imperial guards closing in on me. My gaze was fixed intently on the pulsating heart crystal in the Queen's hand. That was the core of the forbidden spell and the source of her power. Elena. Don't. Cassius's voice grew faint in my mind as he tried to stop me. That crystal will drain your last bit of life force. I glanced back at him, and a sense of fulfillment I had never felt before welled up inside me. I was the sacrifice he had chosen, his storehouse of resources. But now I was his bride, his one and only queen. I spread my arms wide, and despite the suppression of the forbidden spell, I forced all the power of my bloodline to surge through my body. That power coalesced into a tangible vortex that exploded in the palms of my hands. In the name of the bloodline, the forbidden spell is shattered. I let out a long howl, my voice strangely imbued with the ethereal spirit of ancient wolf packs. The vortex in the palm of my hand shot forth like a bolt of black lightning, striking the crystal with pinpoint accuracy. A piercing scream pierced the heavens, and before the Queen's horrified eyes, the crystal exploded into a million shards in an instant. The purple mist receded like a tide, and the confinement collapsed in an instant. At that very moment, my power was completely drained along with the destruction of the crystal. That sense of emptiness felt like a dull knife, slowly slicing through my soul. I felt my consciousness slipping away, my body growing cold, until finally I fell into a warm and spacious embrace. That was Cathus. He had returned to his human form, covered in blood, but his golden eyes were clearer than ever before. He held me in his arms, his trembling grip as if he were desperately clinging to the only truth in the world. No. Elena, look at me. He pressed down hard on my wound, which was growing cold, his voice hoarse like that of a dying beast. I told you, you're mine. Don't you dare die without my permission. The elders and Imperial guards standing nearby were so stunned by the burst of power that they stood there speechless, all stepping back, yet not daring to leave. I looked at him, and the scene before my eyes began to blur. But I could feel the mark that had long been concealed radiating a brilliant golden light through my skin, resonating with the royal crest on his chest in a way I had never experienced before. That was the fusion of our bloodlines, the moment our souls were truly bound as soulmates. I felt a powerful, searing vitality suddenly surge into that icy void. It was him, using our bond to forcefully channel all of his core power as an alpha into my body. I suddenly opened my eyes, and in that instant, my dark brown pupils transformed completely into pure gold, a regal aura that made the heavens and earth tremble. I raised my hand, and the Imperial guards who had surrounded me didn't even dare to look me in the eye. They knelt on the ground in perfect unison, an instinctive act of submission to the supreme authority of the throne. The Queen slumped to the ground, her eyes filled with despair. Cassius helped me to my feet, and we stood side by side on the wasteland, looking down over the entire capital city. This isn't over yet, is it? I asked softly. He clasped my fingers tightly, a mischievous yet tender smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and turned to look at this land we had won with our blood. This is only the beginning, my dear Queen. From this night on, neither the gods nor hell will ever be able to separate us again. We stood atop a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. In the distance, a huge full moon slowly emerged from behind the clouds, casting its light upon this eternal kingdom of darkness that we were about to rule.